Remember, before we started off with James' address, there was a polling question which was displayed. Can we have the results, please? The infrastructure financing gap globally is 57 trillion. Congratulations, the crowd is right. It is 57 trillion. A round of applause for yourself. We have a 10% saying a trillion and 10% saying 458 billion. But the correct answer is 57 trillion. The second one is the Asian gap, financing gap. 59% say 15 trillion, 32% say 9 trillion. What is the right answer? Any guesses? 15 or 9? We've narrowed down the choice. I know for sure it's one of them. 15. How many people say 15? And how many people say 9? Well, the majority always never wins. It is 9 trillion. As I was saying, we have another question for you also. The code for the poll now is Fred Poll 2. To go to the new poll, you'll have to sign out and log in again and go to Fred Poll 2. That's the event code for the second poll. And the question that is being displayed there is, what is maximizing finance for development all about? Public-private partnerships, raising private capital by the public sector, sectoral reforms, efficient institutions, and better value for all stakeholders. And number 4 is all of the above. While you're all signing in and polling, I would want to request Dr. Shamshad Akhtar to please join us. Her profile, she needs no introduction. Her profile would be just displayed. What a lot of people don't know, that she's left all this illustrious career, international, national, World Bank, Asian Development Bank also, and Central Bank experience, to come back to Pakistan to take care of her elderly parents. She's not just a great professional, but a great human being. A thunderous round of applause for Dr. Shamshad Akhtar.
Assalamu alaikum and Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I apologize that I don't have a written script, but these days counting on iPads and telephones helps. So I was approached to speak on building investor trust, public sector pillars and foundation, daunting topic, and it could take hours to talk about it. But before I get into that, first of all, distinguished delegates, presidents of Icap, ICMA, Pakistan, SAFA, CAPA, AFA, and IFI's representatives. Coming from Pakistan, I have seen firsthand the contribution of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan and Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of Pakistan. They not only oversee their profession diligently, but they, as was pointed out earlier by President of Icap, are a great advisor to the public sector, all arms. These institutes are our national pride, but with an international reach. Among these institutions, I have been affiliated off and on in terms of coming and talking at some events. But also lately, I was very impressed by fellow colleagues, chartered accountants, and the firms who helped us in amnesty scheme, operationalization of amnesty scheme. I think these institutes stand out because they have not only helped us interact in pretty pertinent topics, relevance of global, regional, national. But now having all of you here, both at global, regional, national, and also I understand local fraternities and other stakeholders, I'm sure we would be enriched by your exchange. From my standpoint, I have never been able to operate without accountants because they know it all. Quality accounting to me is critical for soundness of economy, businesses, corporate, and stability of financial system. 2008 global crisis, its economic, business, financial, and job losses have brought to forefront the significance of ethics, transparency, regulations, and accounting practices in structuring financial transactions and deals, and or complex and innovative financial products that may have helped us in a number of ways, but also have caused a huge havoc through the financial losses by some reckless use of these. Fiscal and financial governance and management are key to public value creation by promoting resilience and sustainability in financial engineering deals backed by comprehensive financial reporting, discipline, and stability. Now, coming to the public trust issue, regaining eroded public trust in global order, to me, is a tall order in wake of the recurrent crisis. We can always take comfort that I'm doing this or this institution is doing this and IFIs are doing this, but I think the fractures have been pretty deep. The key issue also has been the unfair finance and international trading system, which is getting worse by the day. They together have generated a backlash against globalization and have been undermined by trade wars and tensions over migration. All this has an impact on investor confidence. Stronger global policy coordination by, among others, G20, that I was United Nations Sherpa for the 5 years post-crisis, it has helped undoubtedly global recovery and, as was pointed out, augmentation of multilateral financial institutions' capital to basically leverage private capital. But I think the key question is this capital really reaching where it needs to be? Is this capital being allocated efficiently? And will this capital indeed help us turn around the fortunes? I conclude almost to myself with very mixed feelings because I have worked with IFIs. They can get it right, but they can't get it right all the times. And I know my colleagues are sitting here who have had tremendous experience with IFI. We just heard a lot about the domestic resource mobilization, a topic I'd like to come back, and I'd like to illustrate how we haven't gotten it right despite trying. So I think it's important that private capital be effectively deployed and clearly leveraged for public-private partnership for infrastructure. But now, as we have heard, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including, of course, we need to think of ways how we can help take forward the implementation of the Paris Accord for climate change. Sustainability demands change in the way we live, do development, do business, and exploit and manage finance to eradicate poverty, promote inclusive and equitable growth, generate jobs, and promote climate mitigation and adaptation. Restoring trust, public trust in global order is undoubtedly critical to foster investors' trust. of primary importance is to galvanize action for development of sustainable infrastructure. This calls for, and I'll just concentrate on 4 items. First, to me as an economist, macroeconomic stability. It's a prerequisite for investor confidence and resource mobilization too, because if you don't have macroeconomic stability, you won't be able to collect revenues. It's also key to providing scope and scale for lifting investment in sustainable development goals. Rising macroeconomic imbalances in developing and emerging markets, including countries like ourselves, Pakistan, and Turkey, not far from us, but also other countries, with consequent impact on exchange rate and FX reserves, are faced with dual challenges of a stabilizing economy as a first order now. Of course, catalyzing infrastructure to enhance the competitiveness of the economy will not only help in the short, but in the long term. Short-term stabilization with growth is critical, but needs to be complemented by broad-based structural reforms to strengthen and diversify industry and financial markets. So what's happening in our country on this frontier of macroeconomic stability? We achieve short-term or couple of years stabilization with support of the international financial institutions, but then do not pursue the long-term structural reforms. So I don't know how we can stimulate long-term investor confidence so much needed for the development and particularly sustainable development of Pakistan. My second point, which has been belabored a lot, is enhancing resource mobilization, a subject very close to my heart. It's of course critical, but it's critical to restore trust in governments, which is critical to restore trust in the investors. It's not just about resource mobilization by looking at FBR or whatever our institutions may be, but its ability to have sustained increment in tax GDP ratios, but also other forms of domestic resource mobilization, and to manage our public sector investments effectively. I was talking to some colleagues in Islamabad who have undertaken some studies. They were saying the deployment of public investment that we have undertaken thus far has been done in a very inefficient manner and could have saved the economy billions. Of course, in order to take this lesson learned into account, we should stop the government from undertaking public investment more and more and confine it to purely public goods and leverage private capital to take forward the other requirements of the economy. Like other developing countries, Pakistan tax GDP ratio level remains low. It's not 10%, but it's 11.2% of GDP. But it is less than half of the country's tax potential, if you take that potential to be anywhere from 22 to 23%. A lot of tax areas are outside the tax ambit. Property tax is not being exploited. We don't have effective taxes on real estate. We don't have effective taxes on agriculture, and so forth. So if an informal sector, retail sector, there is one protest and we decide to lift, to roll back the retail tax. And by retail tax, I mean the small, medium businesses also. So Pakistan Tax Bar and accounting associations with whom I interfaced a lot in the last 2.5 months when I was the caretaker finance minister and other portfolios that I was holding, I really got a sense that they can actually play a critical role in the implementation of tax reforms, and I know the Tax Bar Association colleagues are very much a part of the implementation committee, and they sat with me to discuss this. I think they have a much more role than anybody else has, and they have a dual role to play. One is not to be easy on FBR, but all through this implementation committee, but also they have potential to curb tax avoidance and evasion through their role with the companies. These bodies, along with the business acumen that we have in Karachi city, I think we should think of actually collaborating to set up a tax policy body. It's a proposal which has been made by the Pakistan Business Council, and I will be discussing with them. I don't think you need the permission for that. You can just go ahead and set up a tax policy body. India, and I'm sure our colleague from India will agree with me, has one of the best National Institute of Public Finance, who I have interfaced with. And it will surely allow for independent advice to legislature, which has to approve measures for the resource mobilization. Let me turn to another area of resource mobilization. Despite recognition in the MSCI index, Pakistan's market capitalization remains below the vibrant Asian markets. Recent resolve of the Pakistan Stock Exchange and SECP to formulate and implement next generation capital market reforms, and we produced a draft of the roadmap for capital market reforms, which will be taken forward, inshallah, will help us steer the capital market reforms. What capital markets resource mobilization is going to unleash will be far beyond what the tax resource mobilization can bring. The advantage of capital market reforms is that you can actually have the allocation of the capital be decided by the markets too, and not by the governments. So capital markets can also induce the market pressures to strengthen firm-level corporate governance. Furthermore, nurturing a sustainable stock exchange, like some of the Asian exchanges have done, will be instrumental for attracting foreign equity and inflows in bond market development. So that's my take on the resource mobilization. Third point I'd like to bring out is securing financial markets from the emerging waves of the next global crisis. And if I was in Paris very recently talking about the global connectivity issues, and of course the huge financing requirements for global connectivity, and the biggest thing that was a topic for discussion with 10 central bank governors and Nobel Prize winner economists, Nurul Rubini, who's famous for clicking the alarm bells, was that there will be a next global crisis, and it could be bigger than the previous one. So obviously, I can't tell you whether the crystal ball of mine tells me that or not, but imagine if that were to happen and the disruption it will cause. We were fortunate that the last round of global crisis did not impact Asia that much because we had insulated ourselves following the 1997 Asian financial crisis. But this time round is going to be different because we are also now moving towards international interest rate hikes. And of course, in Pakistan, we have as yet not learned how to impose tough curbs on preemption of the banking resources for the fiscal module, or for how to say no to financing losses of state-owned enterprises with private money, which is being channeled through the banking sector. So we have not been able to ease the crowding out of the private sector. And I believe the development should happen in private sector in the developing countries more and more. There is now, however, scope for crowding out finance players by leveraging concessional and private capital for development. For instance, concessional finance can help subordination of debt, and it can raise risk-adjusted returns. It can offer advanced market commitments options. We can exploit development of impact bonds, venture capital, digital financing, and guarantees of different types. There's so much innovation there. These are just some of the areas, but there's also so much richness in how you can raise sustainable financing, green financing, responsible financing. So how do we leverage this? Allow for the right policy framework, engineer the right accounting support, and set up the desired regulatory framework. That itself will boost investor confidence to offer alternate sources of finance. My fourth and last point, which has been touched upon, is to build investor trust for PPPs regimes. But they have to be fixed in line with the global best practices. Have we achieved that in developing countries as yet? Not at all. PPPs are incrementally taking off, but not in a bigger manner. There remain resource and skill deficit, but it's not about the money. As somebody pointed out, I think we went through the number game. I have avoided it, but I can tell you in the UNSCAP, we looked at it, and I think for developing countries, we need $2.5 trillion or so every year, if we want to do really sustainable development business to achieve the 2030 agenda. But is there money out there? Of course. You heard about 100 trillion. I can tell you within Asia, our calculations show that total reserves of Asia, total other types of assets, and the liquidity in the system from alternate sources, we have 56 plus trillion now available. And of course, irrespective of the aging, I think there is huge savings that are going to come in further. So we can promote PPP for infrastructure development. It will be more costly to promote sustainable infrastructure and what we call climate-friendly infrastructure. But this calls for robust governance, legal and regulatory, as well as institutional frameworks to ensure competitive bidding and procurement and price setting, as well as nurturing practices to generate value for money. Across the world, there is no doubt a renewed vigor to launch PPPs. In Pakistan, weaknesses in public finance, limited size of capital markets, now, of course, calls for more aggressive and innovative approach to leveraging PPPs. Some of the transactions in CPEC are either private transactions, of course, guaranteed very heavily. So in that sense, they are PPP, like it or not, but they are PPP backed by a lot of public sector guarantees. Though there is enabling legislation in place for PPPs, there is not the desired environment fully as yet. And approaches and modalities of harnessing PPPs have varied both across federal and provincial governments and across sectors. At federal level, a new legislation was approved in 2016 that I reviewed when I was shortly in the government, and we had a meeting. It's supposed to establish a public-private partnership board, but it's all got all public sector representatives in there from what I have seen. And it's under the oversight of Planning and Development Reform Commission, which will replace PPP infrastructure facility, which did not achieve any results under the Finance Ministry. Meanwhile, provinces have their own legal and institutional frameworks to promote provincial infrastructure development, with whom the multilateral institutions have been working with mixed results. Moving forward, there is need for the country to transfer fully commercial infrastructure development to PPP mode, and using public finance resources, in my view, judiciously to leverage private capital and technical competence, and setting in place a sound bidding and procurement process. In all these arenas, you really need accounting specialists. PPPs should be transparently approved, managed, monitored, and audited. At the same time, developing viable project pipelines and introducing one coherent and consistent PPP policy regime in Pakistan will help introduce clarity and confidence in investors. This is true of other emerging markets too. It's not just, Pakistan is not unique. It's just that you can't have 5 different PPP regime. I mean, I would go crazy if I was a PPP operator trying to figure out, I have to do this in this way in Sindh, and I have to do this in this way in Punjab. And at federal level, the game is different. In all eventuality, Pakistan will need to move forward for strengthening its business environment, which includes ease of doing business. Let me conclude and start by reiterating that the accounting profession has great potential to help public sector foster investor trust by encouraging both their financial and corporate clients to work judiciously to leverage PPP and harness alternate sources of finance and advise on risk mitigation and management. Strengthening public sector pillars and institutions will be key, and again require partnerships between accounting and economics and finance regulatory bodies to promote stability and confidence to prospective investors, both domestic and overseas. Public sector, on its part, need to leverage private capital for sustainable development and to mitigate risk for investors through strengthening the policy and regulatory environment for businesses in the country. Fostering capital market and financial innovation, key to leveraging further private capital for development. Underlying this, there is need for financial regulators and market institutions to improve credit culture and risk management systems, strengthen financial controls, discipline, controls, and resilience by adding elements of credence and trust to financial reporting. Thank you to my colleagues, esteemed colleague in the accounting profession, to invite me to talk to this very rich platform. Thank you.
Dr. Saab, please stay on stage. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab, for an enlightening speech. She's a great advocate of the role of private sector in raising sustainable finance and would like to see a more enabling environment to mobilize and effectively utilize private capital. I would now again request Mr. Riaz Rahman and Mr. Zia to come and present her with a plaque for all the effort, and as a memento, thank you from both the institutes for taking time out of a busy schedule and come and speak to us.